In its first weekend of release, Sony's Venom defied the lackluster reviews from professional critics and opened to 80 million at the domestic box office, and to the audience consensus that it, quote, wasn't that bad. Given what the movie is, and the behind-the-scenes talent involved in making it, both of those are, all things considered, huge wins, leaving many asking the question, what the hell went right? But there is a downside here, because Venom scoring this kind of box office is potentially very bad news for Spider-Man's future presence in the MCU. In this post-release analysis, we are going to explore just that further. To do so, I'll first put the Venom box office numbers into context, before sharing my own views on the movie. Then, we'll take apart where the movie stepped wrong and what it did right. And finally, see what a box office result like this could mean for Sony's own proprietary Marvel Spider-Man universe, and by extension, for Spider-Man's future presence in the legitimate Marvel Cinematic Universe. Venom had a budget of 100 million that Sony will admit to, a pretty decent sized budget for a movie about the Spider-Man villain whose previous appearance was the low point of Spider-Man 3, which itself was arguably the low point of the entire Spider-Man franchise, so no one can accuse Sony of not taking at least something of a gamble here. That gamble paid off in droves, because even if it nosedives catastrophically in its second weekend, which it may not, Venom will already have broken even at the worldwide box office by then. The question isn't so much if Venom will be profitable for Sony, but how profitable. Venom's opening weekend was the biggest opening weekend ever for the month of October, which really doesn't mean anything other than giving Sony something to brag about in press releases. But it also opened bigger than Ant-Man and the Wasp, which, while just the Ant-Man sequel, is an actual MCU movie nonetheless. And Sony's Venom, a movie that is Marvel in name only, beat it. That they will use for all it's worth in future negotiations with Marvel, but more on that later. In any event, the movie is doing pretty good business so far, and audiences seem to have enjoyed it more than they thought they would. Before we move on to why that might be, allow me to share my own thoughts on it. Venom is a character I have a great deal of childhood affection and nostalgia for. While I obviously did know of Spider-Man from before, it was this issue right here of the Norwegian Spider-Man magazine, which contained issues 316 and 317 of The Amazing Spider-Man, that made me a true fan, not just of Spider-Man, but of Venom, and which quite possibly set me on the path of becoming the comic book reader I would become down the line. In the many years since, both Venom and Spider-Man himself have been bypassed by many other characters on my list of favorites, but I still have that childhood affection. As such, I had very mixed feelings going in. I very much so wanted a Venom movie, a good one at that, but I did not want a Venom movie made by Avi Arad and Amy Pascal. I did not want a Venom movie that takes place in a universe where Spider-Man doesn't exist. And I certainly did not want a Venom movie which was made essentially to screw over Marvel and the MCU. But that is what we got. So, what did I think about it? I'm going to have to chime in with what so many others are saying. It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. It also wasn't that good, not by any stretch. But it was kind of fun. Sufficiently so that by the movie's end, I found myself thinking, damn, bring on Maximum Carnage. Because it really wasn't that bad. To be clear, it wasn't that bad is not high praise. Very few are calling the movie great, but it obviously defied audience expectations, which must have left many feeling positively surprised. Audiences gave the movie a B+ on CinemaScore, which again is not great, but it could have been worse. What was worse was the Rotten Tomatoes rating, with only 30% of professional critics giving the movie an overall positive review, so they clearly enjoyed the movie a lot less than the general audience did. So why this discrepancy? I have some thoughts on that. While there of course are individual differences in both taste and ability, professional critics generally tend to favor movies which are well crafted and put together from a technical perspective, in that they have a clear but complex and layered story, solid acting and direction, a consistent tone, and are edited to a pace which matches that tone and mise-en-scene. Despite the good box office numbers, producers Avi Arad, Matt Tolmach and Amy Pascal shouldn't be too proud of themselves, because in all of those departments, Venom failed. The basic screen story is perfectly serviceable, but the movie, and therefore its script, lacks the layers and complexity we over the course of the past decade have come to expect of comic book movies in general and of Marvel movies in particular, which is why critics tend to praise them the way they do. Also, just prior to the movie's release, Tom Hardy let it slip that his favorite 40 minutes of the movie were the ones on the cutting room floor. The movie is close to 2 hours as is. If there are 40 minutes worth of deleted scenes laying around, that means the script wasn't tight enough when the movie started filming. Worse yet, that Hardy's favorite scenes are among those 40 deleted minutes suggests that they had a hard time editing the movie. There is wide agreement that the movie has first act issues, meaning that they in the end did not get the final edit to the point where it needed to be. Speaking of Tom Hardy, he hammed his performance up every bit as bad as Dominic West did as Jigsaw in Punisher Warzone. Put it all together, and what you have is schlock, only very, very expensive schlock. Critics generally don't take kindly to that. By contrast, the average moviegoer tends to place greater importance on whether or not a movie is entertaining, rather than the craftsmanship that went into making it. More often than not, critics and audiences will agree, as movies universally recognized as great are usually both well-crafted and entertaining, while on movies universally recognized as bad, the poor craftsmanship involved is detrimental to the movie's ultimate entertainment value. Where critics and audiences disagree is when the movie in question excels in one aspect that one group places great emphasis on, but the other does not. Case in point, the banter between Brock and the symbiote really clicked where entertainment is concerned. It wasn't deep, so wasted opportunity there, but it was nonetheless very entertaining. In my opinion, that is what single-handedly saved the movie, as it by extension made all the Venom action entertaining as well. Had that interaction not been there, I think critics and audiences would have been more aligned, and not in a way which would have benefited the movie. So instead of thinking themselves great and infallible Kevin Feige level producers, which I'm sure at the very least Pascal and Arad are prone to doing, what they should do is take the critic response to heart, and recognize that even the audience is giving the movie the same cinema score as Suicide Squad and The Amazing Spider-Man 2. In other words, they lucked out this time, but if they want to be sure of sustaining this level of success for next time, they will have to do better. And there will be a next time. Unless the movie suddenly collapses utterly in its second week, the audience will have, through the vote of their wallets, given Sony the mandate to proceed with a Venom sequel featuring Carnage. But Sony doesn't just want a Venom franchise with a new movie every other or third year. They already have one such franchise in Spider-Man, and the two still aren't enough for them. What Sony wants is a Marvel Cinematic Universe all of their own, one where they can release a new movie every year, even movies that the audience may not have any real desire to see, but will anyway, out of pure obligation to the Marvel brand. And make no mistake about it, they hope and count on the audience confusing their movies with the legitimate MCU movies. Case in point, how many saw Venom thinking it was a Marvel movie? To this end, the movie next out in Sony's competing Marvel universe isn't the Venom sequel, but Morbius the Living Vampire, starring Jared Leto. If Venom had underperformed, Morbius would have been put on the back burner, and more likely than not, eventually fallen into oblivion, while Sony renewed their Spider-Man deal with Marvel. But with the box office results Venom is getting, Sony have instead been galvanized, and their Marvel universe is now being fast-tracked. According to Avi Arad and Matt Tolmach, Morbius may begin production as early as February. Also in development is Kraven the Hunter, from writer Richard Wenk. According to him, it will feature the storyline Kraven's Last Hunt, and Spider-Man will be in it. Before Sony entered the Spider-Man deal with Marvel, but after Andrew Garfield got himself fired from the Amazing Spider-Man franchise, Sony knew they had to reboot Spider-Man again. The only question was, do they do it themselves, or let Marvel do it for them? In the end, and with a lot of nudging from Sony corporate in Japan if rumors are to be believed, they opted for working with Marvel. But there was strong resistance against the idea in Sony Pictures, with many wanting Sony to keep Spider-Man to themselves. The hot storyline candidate for Sony's next Spider-Man reboot at the time was Kraven's Last Hunt. It would appear that idea has been recycled. As the Spider-Man deal with Marvel currently stands, Sony cannot use Spider-Man in any of their own Marvel movies, which are made without the involvement of Marvel Studios. And to be clear, even if the logo at the beginning of Venom said in association with Marvel, it was in fact made without Marvel's involvement or input, and probably without their genuine blessing, which Sony doesn't need anyway. Sony can make all the movies they want about Spider-Man's villains, but they can't feature Spider-Man, not even in a cameo, not while the deal with Marvel is still in play. That Kraven writer Richard Wenk then explicitly talks about Spider-Man appearing in the movie is troubling, because for that to actually happen, one of two things would have to happen first. Either Marvel and Sony would have to extend the Spider-Man deal, but with an addendum that would allow Sony to make movies Marvel officially recognizes and endorses as part of their legitimate MCU, so they can feature Spider-Man. Or Sony would have to yank Spider-Man out of the MCU following the release of Spider-Man Far From Home and put him into their own Sony Marvel universe alongside Venom, Morbius and Kraven, and whatever other Spider-Man villains Sony decides to shove down our throats. Of these two scenarios, the latter is regrettably the more likely one. And I do consider that regrettable, because that would mean that Spider-Man would be under the creative control of the producers who failed with Spider-Man several times over already. The producer who single-handedly killed Ivan Reitman's Ghostbusters 3 and forced Paul Feig's remake upon the world instead. And under the ultimate control of the studio head honcho who cancelled Firefly, mandated Alien v Predator be PG-13 and set on contemporary Earth, micromanaged X3 and X-Men Origins Wolverine, and then personally blocked Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool for years. Oh, and he killed one of the better takes on He-Man Sony had going. So yeah, quite the dream team there. It should be noted though, that we on the outside don't know what will actually happen, not at this time. If it hasn't already, that will be decided behind closed doors between Sony and Marvel. But with Venom doing the kind of box office it now does, with Sony having another budding Marvel universe to put Spider-Man into, they will be demanding much more than before to extend the deal with Marvel, quite possibly more than Marvel are willing to give. On this occasion, Venom's gain really could be Spider-Man's loss. Let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comments.
If you like this video, then please click the subscribe button. And don't forget to click the bell icon to be notified for all the latest uploaded content. Due to recent changes to YouTube's monetization policies, we'd also like to ask you to please consider supporting Midnight's Edge and its sister channel Midnight's Edge After Dark through Patreon. As thanks for their support, patrons will receive early notifications of mini-documentaries, special behind-the-scenes making of the Edge videos, bloopers, outtakes, lost episodes, and more. You can support the channel for as little as $1 a month. Be sure to check back for news and analysis on the corporate politics behind your favorite genre movies, as well as updates and discussion here at Midnight's Edge.